Olguin from the Learning and Professional Development team, and welcome to this training session on interdisciplinary patient activity. This session is designed for the interdisciplinary group who maintain the patient's plan of care and perform recertification and face-to-face documentation. Let's get started by discussing our objectives.
In this class, you'll be introduced to the IDG team documentation and entry requirements for the system. By the end of the class, you will be able to use the system to create and work with the associated IDG documents for admission, ongoing care, and discharge. Create and update forms which are used by the hospice physician when determining continued eligibility. Follow process steps required for initiating face-to-face and recertification documentation. Let's look at the plan of care process flow. It starts with the order to admit. Determine if a face-to-face encounter is needed. The admission RN documents assessment findings from his or her initial or comprehensive admission assessment. From assessment findings, the admission plan of care is created and the plan of care is established. Physician orders are captured on the admission plan of care and flow to the hospice initial order form. The CTI is received. The IDG plan of care is updated in real time as a patient's needs change. At the time of the first IDG meeting, the IDG plan of care is finalized and a new IDG plan of care review and update is created. The IDG plan of care review and update is updated in real time until the next IDG meeting, in which the plan of care is reviewed and finalized by the IDG. A new IDG plan of care review and update is created and the plan of care review and update cycle continues. Let's now take a look at the IDG process overview. The process for the interdisciplinary activity includes the admission detailing the plan of care that is based on assessment findings and established prior to care being provided. Assessment information is entered on the IDG plan of care, including visit frequencies. The patient is discussed at the first IDG meeting following admission. On an ongoing basis, the plan of care is updated no less than 15 days and as frequently as the patient's condition requires. If a patient is discharged live or discharge has already occurred, the patient must be discussed at a final IDG meeting. All plans of care must be closed for both live discharges and transfers to bereavement. In preparing for the IDG meeting, you need the IDG meeting agenda and sign-in sheet, the IDG patient roster from McKesson Hospice for meeting review and minutes, the McKesson Hospice reports including the admission, recertification, discharges, and level of care information to establish your agenda. In preparation of plan of care updates, you will need to continue with written documentation until the patient has integrated into the system. The IDG meeting continues to be facilitated by the manager of clinical practice. This chart is a suggested process flow for running an IDG meeting with paper documents. You may be using this flow now to assist with documenting, signing, and passing the paper plan of care form in the direction of the green arrows. Because the plan of care is an electronic document, there is really not an easy way to pass it around. So we offer a suggestion to begin tracking who has the electronic IDG form. In general, the MCP creates the IDG form and may initiate the paper document sample shown on screen. Using this form, each clinician will take turns opening the IDG form, reviewing the document, then signing and saving the IDG plan of care, checking off your name or discipline, and passing the workflow document to the next clinician. Passing the workflow document to the next clinician is the indicator that you are finished with your portion of the IDG plan of care. This continues until everyone has signed and saved the IDG Plan of Care Review and Update form. The hospice medical director is the last person to document and sign. This is repeated for each patient being discussed. It is important to note that this is an optional process until the IDG becomes familiar with working in the hospice system and with the IDG documents. First, we will go over the IDG Plan of Care. When the patient is admitted, information from the nursing, psychosocial, and spiritual care assessments flow to the interdisciplinary Plan of Care document. For the social worker and the spiritual care, the Plan of Care will be documented directly on the form. This form is the Plan of Care used from admission until the first IDG meeting. If the patients need change during this time, and our plans change, those are documented on this form. It is completed or locked at the first IDG meeting after admission. Here is an overview of how the interdisciplinary Plan of Care document gets moved through the system. Select the patient. The comprehensive assessment documentation is completed by the nurse. Next, he or she will create the Interdisciplinary Plan of Care or IDG POC form. The social worker and the spiritual care coordinator will complete their respective comprehensive assessments within the required time frame and update the IDG POC form in preparation of the IDG. As the first IDG meeting is conducted, all will document any updates. The MCP reviews the IDG POC following the meeting, and the IDG POC review and update form is then created. We will now review the steps in more detail. So let's look at how the interdisciplinary Plan of Care document is created. It's part of the admission assessment packet. First, select the patient, then select the admission packet. Select the Interdisciplinary Plan of Care link to open the form. The establishment of the POC is on the Interdisciplinary Plan of Care form. Something that will be different is that it's a shared form in the hospice system, so any member of the team can make updates to it once it's created at admission. Each team member contributes initial information from the date of admission or assessment until the first IDG when it is reviewed at the first meeting. Let's recap how the Interdisciplinary Plan of Care is created as part of the admission process. IDG team members will make updates to this IDG POC until it is locked by the MCP. It is completed collaboratively during the first IDG meeting where all members of the team, including the hospice medical director, review and update the form prior to adding their signatures. We'll look more closely at a couple of sections of the IDG POC. An important section is the diagnosis area that will contain documentation by the admitting nurse from the comprehensive assessment. This will auto-populate on the IDG form. Since the hospice physician is responsible for determining diagnosis relatedness to the patient's terminal prognosis, this form provides a place to document those findings. Note: if a diagnosis is determined to be unrelated, a reason is required. Any changes to the diagnosis require coding and must include the date of onset. This information mirrors McKesson Hospice for reporting to Medicare on our claim. The IDG POC contains the scope and frequencies needed for hospice services. The PCS will use scheduled visits to be a signed report to identify scheduling actions. That process will be reviewed in the scheduling class. For now, we will see how the visit frequency is processed in the hospice system by the IDG. Confirm the frequencies entered are correct as determined by the IDG. If frequencies have not been entered, select Add in the appropriate disciplines box. The Add Frequency box displays. Enter the scheduling set if applicable. the frequency or number of visits, the duration, and the start week or start date. If more frequencies are needed for this discipline, select Add More Frequencies. Select Save when you are finished. The frequencies you entered appear on the POC, and the visits are plotted on the patient's schedule. Note: at this point in the process, those frequencies have not been assigned to a staff member. To edit a frequency, select it and make the necessary changes in the Add Frequency box. Repeat the process for all required disciplines. When you are updating and working with the current IDG POC, don't forget to sign and save this form. Just as you do with other forms, you'll scroll to the bottom of the page and make a selection. In this case, you will sign and save, and the form will remain accessible to all team members in the patient chart and the shared forms folder. Once the POC has been updated with the current plans of care and finalized during the IDG meeting, the team will electronically sign the form. To do this, you will find the document in your Forms to be Signed folder and open it by selecting the form title link or the blue arrow. Once it has opened, review each page and navigate to the last page and select Sign in the section appropriate for your discipline. If the nurse practitioner is signing the POC, he or she can sign in one of the sections labeled Other. By selecting Sign, the system applies your electronic signature and the current date and time to the document. Once the POC contains all necessary information and has been signed by the IDG, the MCP will scroll to the bottom of the page and select Complete. The Authorized Signature dialog displays. Enter your user ID and password and select Authorize. The POC is now completed or locked. It remains available for view-only access to all assigned personnel. The next step in the process is to review the integration log for any system errors with the document. The MCP and Quality Manager will learn of the integration log in additional training classes. Several states require that the attending physician review and give input to the plan of care. This form is used for that purpose and sent to the attending physician for input. When this form is completed, it goes to Order Tracking, where medical records will follow up with the document until the attending physician signs the form and returns it to us. Next, let's look at the IDG POC Review and Update. The IDG must meet and discuss the patient and update the plan of care no less than 15 days and as frequently as the patient's condition requires. The IDG POC auto-populates the IDG Review and Update form. We are required to update the plan of care. That means just because the form auto-populates, we should not see the same items checked week to week. In fact, we need to be more careful to individualize the plan of care and elaborate regarding our findings. When we are updating the POC, what are we specifically working with the patient on until the next IDG? That should be our focus. Like the initial POC, the IDG Plan of Care Review and Update form is created and updated collaboratively until the IDG meeting. The update form is also a shared form. All assigned team members whose scope of practice allows it are able to make edits and updates to it between IDG meetings as a patient's care needs change. And don't forget that each page of the IDG POC should be reviewed and saved. This is to ensure that data from each page flows or auto-populates to the next IDG Plan of Care Review and Update. enter the frequencies as determined by the IDG. You must sign and save the IDG POC form. Confirm the frequencies entered are correct as determined by the IDG. If frequencies have not been entered, select Add in the appropriate disciplines box. The Add Frequency box displays. When you are updating and working with the current IDG POC, don't forget to sign and save this form. Just as you do with other forms, you will scroll to the bottom of the page and make a selection. In this case, you will sign and save, and the form will remain accessible to all team members in the patient chart and the shared forms folder. Following each IDG POC review, a new Plan of Care Review and Update form is created. Let's now discuss discharge and the plan of care. Not discussing the patient who has died is like not reading the final chapter of a good book. You need to discuss and document were goals met, what progress was made toward those goals. All plans of care must be closed and the patient is transferred to bereavement. Let's take a look at the final plan of care once the patient is no longer on service. Document on the live discharge area of the plan of care if applicable. Make sure to include at the time of discharge what progress was made toward the patient goals. If the patient has died, have the plans of care been closed and the patient transferred to bereavement? Let's transition over to the face-to-face and recertification process. On the face-to-face forms, the non-certifying physician and nurse practitioner use the same form. The certifying physician has a separate form. Remember that the RN authors the clinical review for support of hospice eligibility and the hospice physician reviews it. Findings are discussed in the IDG meeting. The hospice medical director certification and recertification forms are combined. Let's take a look at those forms. First, let's take a look at the forms used in the recertification process that have been revised, and then we'll look at how they work in the system. Instead of the physician completing one form and the nurse practitioners completing a different form, now the nurse practitioners and non-certifying hospice physicians use the same form, since neither is certifying the patient for continued eligibility, just documenting the face-to-face findings. The certifying hospice physician has a separate form. The certifying hospice physician form contains the attestation statement as follows. I certify that I had a face-to-face encounter on this date and that I used the clinical findings from that encounter in determining the continued eligibility for hospice care. The hospice physician also has to sign the hospice physician certification recertification form. The hospice physician certification recertification form contains required narrative summary, the certification statement, an attestation that the physician composed the narrative summary and, if applicable, reviewed the face-to-face findings. Now, let's look at how that process works. The administrative staff can schedule a face-to-face visit for the hospice physician or nurse practitioner, which will show on their calendar. The administrative staff also has the ability to create forms needed for that visit or encounter and can push the forms to the physician or nurse practitioner, although this should be a rare exception. The nurse needs to create the CTI in the system prior to the upcoming face-to-face visit so that the benefit periods will populate the face-to-face form. We'll discuss how this is done later in the presentation. Now, let's briefly walk through the steps that the nurse practitioner or physician uses when completing these forms. The hospice physician or nurse practitioner will start by selecting the patient and then choosing from the two choices of the face-to-face forms. They will choose the hospice nurse practitioner or non-certifying physician face-to-face form or the hospice certifying physician face-to-face form. They will document their encounter. They will sign and save and send to office. This is an example of the physician's main menu and shows steps 1 and 2, selecting a patient, and the two forms that they can choose from, which are available from My Forms packets. They include face-to-face recert for certifying physician, face-to-face recert for the nurse practitioner, or non-certifying physician. The next step is documenting their face-to-face encounter findings. That would be done on one of two forms. Let's look at those. The first form is the hospice nurse practitioner or non-certifying physician face-to-face form. Notice how this form differs from the certifying physician's form in that the nurse practitioner or non-certifying physician is attesting the findings of their encounter were provided to the certifying physician. The certifying physician's face-to-face form looks the same as the other form except for the title and verbiage of the attestation. The hospice physician attestation is located on the last screen of the document. The statement indicates that the hospice physician who had the face-to-face encounter is also the certifying physician, and that they are using those findings to determine continued hospice eligibility. Our next step is to send the form to the office with signature. The physician or nurse practitioner scrolls to the bottom and selects Send to Office. On the Send to Office dialog box, choose the default of Complete with Signature. Next, we will look at recertification. Before we do that, let's review and take a quick look at the initial certification process steps. With the initial CTI, the admitting RN selected the admission assessment from the packet and then submitted the certification forms to both the attending and hospice physician. So let's see how that differs for the recertification steps. It is important for the RN to create the CTI prior to the face-to-face visit, if one is required, so that the face-to-face visit has the benefit period information populated. Let's talk about those steps needed to create the CTI. Start by selecting a patient. Step 2 is selecting a packet. Is the patient entering a 90-day period or a 60-day period? The next step is creating the new benefit period. Next, you will create or update forms in the packet that support the new benefit period. Let's look at those more in detail. As just stated, the RN is preparing to create the documents for the next benefit period. The question is asked, is the patient in his or her benefit period and therefore has another 90-day benefit period left? Or is the patient in his or her second or greater benefit period, meaning we'll be going to 60-day certifications from now on? This will determine which packet will be utilized. For class today, we will use the certification 90-day packet. The next step is creating that new benefit period. Let's look how you do that. This is what you will see once you have chosen the 90-day link. Click on the top link, Hospice Physician Recertification of Terminal Illness 90-day link first. This opens the recert form and creates a new benefit period or episode in the system. If applicable, enter the verbal certification information, then sign and save the form. The form will close and take you back to the packet. Back in the packet, notice the Hospice Physician of Terminal Illness 90-day period form is on the screen twice. The one at the top has a note in parentheses. This will create a new episode. Don't select this one because it will create another episode or benefit period. When updating, be sure to select the form that is displayed here in Episode 2 that is in pending status. Remember that you will not push this form to the physician until the 15-day recertification window. At that time, you will confirm that you want to push the form to the appropriate hospice physician just as you did on the initial certification. Select Push and OK to confirm that you want to push the form. Select the physician in the User checkbox, then tap Push. You will need to monitor this form for physician signature as you need to send this form to the office after the hospice physician has signed the form. We all know we will be completing the clinical review for support of hospice eligibility, as a certifying physician will be using information from this form in the recertification process. The clinical review for support of hospice eligibility form is created to document your eligibility findings. It is then sent to office with signature. Here's how it looks. First, open the form and document your findings. Select Send to Office. In the Send to Office box, leave defaulted to Complete with Signature and tap OK. Next, you will update the Comprehensive Drug Profile form within the recertification packet. Let's walk through this. As you see on the slide, the drug profile created in the new benefit period does not have a status. The old drug profile is in a pending status. The nurse will want to open and review this one for correctness, then close it. Next, click on the drug profile in the new benefit period. It will contain all active medication from the previous profile. We will do a couple of other things here as well. When you are updating the newly created drug profile, make sure that you are checking the box, "The profile has been reviewed by an individual with palliative care training." An individual with palliative care training would be a physician who is certified in hospice and palliative medicine, a hospice and palliative care certified RN, or a hospice script pharmacist. Not only should this be done at recert, but also at admission and with every medication change. Depending on who you are reviewing the newly created med profile and medication changes with, you would check the different boxes. Now we want to sign and save this form. After signing and saving the new drug profile in the system, you will return to the packet where you will see the new form has a status of pending and the previous profile has the status of closed. The new profile will be used for any updates to medication for this upcoming benefit period. Now let's look at the last form you will need to update as part of the recertification packet, and that is the Hospice Aid Assignment form. If the patient has a new or continuing need for hospice aid, create a new Hospice Aid Assignment form within the recertification packet. When you update the Hospice Aid Assignment within the recertification packet, note that the Hospice Aid Assignment from the previous benefit period remains open at this time and will need to be closed. Now you have created and updated all of the required recertification forms. Now, let's look at the Physician Certification of Terminal Illness form for this benefit period. Several states require two physicians to recertify the patient. If you are in one of those states, you will need to create the CTI for the hospice physician to sign as usual. Next, you will open and create the attending physician certification of terminal illness form from the state-specific menu. On the form, you will document the verbal certification if applicable, select Send to Office, then complete with signature when prompted. In review, you should be able to use the system to create and work with the associated IDG POC documents for admission, ongoing care, and discharge. Follow the process steps required for initiating the face-to-face and recertification documentation.
That concludes this training session. Thank you for your participation, and we hope you found this session informative and helpful as we collaborate together to deliver uncompromising care. Thank you.